Thank you very much for coming today. My name is Nancy Dallance, and I'm the Director of Education at the Tampa Bay History Center. And it was a year ago or so that my boss, CJ Roberts, said, Weedon Island is such a great place. Is there any way we can partner with them? And we looked into it, explored a few ideas, and it seemed like this Florida Conversation lecture would be the perfect match to hopefully start a great long-term partnership, or maybe I should say continue long-term partnership. So we've been really pleased at how this has worked out, bringing some of our favorite folks here, as well as meeting with the Weedon Island family and working together on it. So it has been great. I just want to tell you one little thing coming up, which you might know about. So today's lecture is part of our Florida Conversation series, and that was this brochure. And we do that almost monthly throughout the school year. Lots of great lectures. This will be live streamed and recorded so that it'll be on YouTube so people can see it forever and ever. We feel like it's really important to document these topics and have them available for everybody free. So that's our purpose. But at the Tampa Bay History Center in downtown Tampa, if you're not familiar, we have a new exhibit that opened in early March called Etched Feathers, The History of the Printed Bird, and that is this brochure that you might see. So we know a lot of people are birders and really friends of Audubon and the birding community out there. And an artist named John Costin of Tampa is very active in this area. And so this exhibit is about his works, his collection, and the process. And so it mixes natural history, art history, and a lot of great stuff all together. So we will have a lecture, the Duckwall Lecture, sponsored by the Duckwall Foundation, on April 12th. And we hope that you will come. That will be at the Tampa Bay History Center, but it'll also be live streamed so you could see it from anywhere and recorded. So thank you very much for coming today, and I look forward to learning a lot and hearing a lot.
Thank you, Nancy, and I want to give our heartfelt thanks to Tampa Bay History Center for having us be part of their distinguished Florida Lecture Series and for being able to showcase Michael Francis today. Thank you all for coming. My name is Joan Landis, and I'm on the education team here at Weedon Island Preserve, and we've been planning to go big this year for Florida Archaeology Month, and instead of just one celebration, we've been doing a bunch of cool events, and I have a lot of partners that I want to thank for helping to support a wonderful and fabulous Florida Archaeology Month with the proverbial cherry on top being the presentation that you are all here for today. First, I'd like to thank our on-site archaeology partner, AWARE, the Alliance for Weedon Island Archaeological Research and Education, a really important partner for us in sustaining our cultural heritage and understanding our cultural heritage here at Weedon Island. The Florida Public Archaeology Network, which is a wonderful organization that has provided a lot of resources, particularly archaeological educational resources for us here at Weedon Island. Take a look at our publications, newsletter, website for programs and upcoming workshops sponsored by FPAN, as we call them. I want to call out USF because USF has so many affiliations, the Anthropology Club, Dr. Francis and Dr. Arthur are all associated. They're colleagues at USF, and they're a very important partner of ours, and also are responsible for upkeep on a archaeological work that is done here on the island as well. Central Gulf Coast Archaeological Society has been a great partner and again offers some wonderful resources for us and for the public to understand our cultural heritage. I have to give a call out to our Friends group, the Friends of Weedon Island, another group that you might consider joining. They also are involved in supporting the conservation and stewardship of Weedon Island Preserve, and then of course the Tampa Bay History Center, our newest partner in the realm of getting us history and recognition of our culture. So all month long, we've been offering really cool programs, and as I said, the cherry on top is going to be Michael Francis's presentation. I want to thank you all for being here today, and now I'm going to turn it over to John Arthur for an introduction for Michael.
I'm John Arthur. I'm president of AWARE, the Alliance for Weedon Island Archaeological Research and Education. Our mission is to educate the public and to preserve the cultural heritage of Weedon Island and the Tampa Bay and the surrounding areas. So check us out online. Everything, all the money that we receive, the funds that we receive from the public goes to preserving the archaeological heritage of the region. We have no paid staff, so check us out online, aware.org. Before I introduce Dr. Francis, I just want to do some groundskeeping here. So we're going to wait and have questions and answers afterwards, and then if you're online, please, as you're watching the presentation, you have a question, just type in your question into the Q&A link or area of the Zoom. And then after the presentation, then we'll open it up for questions, okay? So it's my pleasure and honor to introduce our speaker today, Dr. Michael Francis. He's on the board of AWARE. He received his PhD in history from the University of Cambridge, and after a brief stint at the University of North Florida, he was named the Huff Family Chair of Florida Studies at the University of South Florida, St. Petersburg, which I'm happy to have him as a colleague and friend. He's written extensively about the history of Florida, and since 2016 has served as the executive director of the ambitious new digital history project, La Florida, the interactive digital archive of the Americas. Check it out online, it is very impressive. Dr. Francis has received numerous national and international awards, such as from the American Museum of Natural History and the Library of Congress. In 2019, Dr. Francis received a $250,000 grant from the National Archives to support a 3-year digital history project titled Lost Voices from America's Oldest Parish Archive, 1594 to 1821. And that was launched in October of 2022. In 2021, he was appointed to serve on the Florida Historical Commission, and I'll save the best for last. That same year, Spain's King Philip VI bestowed upon Dr. Francis the Officer's Cross of the Order of Isabella the Catholic, one of Spain's most prestigious civil orders. Please welcome Dr. Francis.
Thank you. Thank you for the wonderful introduction. Can you hear me? Yeah, the mic's working? Okay. I'm going to start really with a confession. Maybe it's a good idea to lock the doors so no one can escape. I'm not an archaeologist. I've always had archaeology envy. They wear better clothes, they do far cooler things, but I'm not an archaeologist. I'm a historian, but I'm delighted to be here today to share a little bit about this project that I've spent, gosh, it feels like I've been working on this project since the 16th century, that we launched last October. So thank you so much, and thanks for all to all the sponsors for making this happen. The project really began with a question that a student posed in an early Florida seminar. And, well, to be honest, the origin of this project probably has multiple origins, but the one that I remember best is a question posed by a student in an early Florida history course that I teach, when he looked at this list of Spanish expeditions to Florida from the 16th century, the major Spanish expeditions to what we call Florida. And the student asked me, who are these people? Who are the people we call the conquistadors? What do we know about their backgrounds? What do we know about where they were from, their ages, level of education? occupations? Were these professional military men? Were they literate or not? Did they come from certain parts of Spain or from other regions? And the truth is, I had to answer the question to my best ability at the time, and which was, we don't know. We don't know. We can make guesses, guesses based on what's been done for other regions of the Americas, but we don't know. And a very good Florida historian, Paul Hoffman, once wrote that it's almost impossible to determine with any kind of precision the identities of the first waves of Europeans and others who came to Florida. And my students and other colleagues said, hold our beer. Let's see if we can find something about this. So we really began looking at the expedition led by Pedro Menendez de Avilés, who founded the city of St. Augustine in 1565, because we were intrigued by the list of occupations of people that he brought with him. And so you think of these stone cutters and bricklayers, tailors, 21 tailors and 8 hosiers, rope makers and blacksmiths, an apothecary and a tanner, a master tile maker, a sawyer. The baker must have been extraordinarily popular. You know, the one baker who came on this, 5 locksmiths and silversmiths and barbers. Of course, barbers perform minor surgeries as well. They didn't just give you a nice haircut and a shave. A trumpeter, 1 hat maker, 117 laborers, and then my personal favorite, and probably Professor Arthur's as well, this guy here, un maestre de hacer cerveza, a master beer brewer. So you can't have an expedition without a master beer brewer. These, in the end, are the people we call the conquistadors. These are all part of this group of individuals who joined Menendez in 1565 called the conquistadors. So we were able to identify almost 600 of that first group of Menendez folks. And then we started to work on an expedition that I know is near and dear to all of your hearts, the Sancho de Arciniega expedition. Yeah, silence. Nobody really knows, hardly anyone, you don't hear this name. I think you can walk around all of St. Augustine and you never even see the name Sancho de Arciniega. Sancho de Arciniega led the largest expedition to Florida, the single largest Spanish expedition from the entire colonial period was the expedition led in 1566, 10 months after St. Augustine was founded, by Sancho de Arciniega. And that expedition consisted of 18 ships and more than 2,500 individuals who went on that particular one. And if you were to do a map for, say, a 4th or 5th grade Florida history textbook that indicated where the people were from who went on that expedition, this is what it would look like. So there were 4 mariners from a place we call today Croatia. There was representation from Poland, Germany, Greece, North Africa. I'm particularly fascinated with this part of the map. There was a Native American from Florida who went on that expedition, likely as a translator and a guide, and we don't know who this individual was. Where was he from? I mean, he had to have been in Spain before Menendez set out. So he had been in Spain for some time, and he went back on this expedition in 1566. We have about 400 physical descriptions of people who went on this expedition. People like Francisco Martin, medium build, black beard, and dark. He has 1 eye and a scar next to his left eye from a knife wound. We don't have portraits of any of these individuals who went on. This is the closest we get. And to get a license, an official license to go to the Americas, you often had to go to the Casa de la Contratación, the House of Trade in Seville, and they would give you a license with a description. Why a description? Well, of course, they don't want people selling licenses under the table. But then, as in now, people always followed the law. No, wait. People often sold licenses under the table. There are at least 6 people who go on this expedition who went on the expedition as people they were not. They bought licenses from somebody else. Pedro Toves from Asturias, tall, pockmarked face. He's the only one of the 400 descriptions we have of somebody who appears to have survived a smallpox outbreak. We thought there'd be a lot more of these. He's the only one. But he's got a scar on his 3rd finger from his left hand. And Pedro de Allenda, how'd you like to be him? Tall, dark, and handsome, with 2 scars on his face and forehead. And Antonio Garcia follows and says, ooh, tall, dark, and handsome. Nope, round and fat with a big nose. And so you get, this is the one window you get into these sorts of, the characters who arrive in these early expeditions who end up living around this area, around Tocobaga in the mid-1560s, various Spanish fortifications that extended all the way into the Tennessee Valley. And we now have almost 3,500 of those individuals identified. We haven't published the Hernando de Soto material, but we have about 600 Soto people now identified, including a 12-year-old girl who survived the expedition, and about 7 or 8 free black conquistadors who were part of the Soto expedition. But that left us with, in a sense, a large group of European men. What about everybody else? What about people of African descent? People of African descent went on every single Spanish expedition from the 16th century without exception. All of them, from Juan Ponce de León in 1513 through Sancho de Arciniega. What about Florida's Native American population? You'd almost get the sense from looking just at lists of so-called conquistadors that everybody who lived here was European. And of course, that's not the case. Native Americans outnumber Europeans during the entire colonial period. But they're not in these kinds of records. What about women and children? You'd almost get the sense, looking at that database, that there were no children. People didn't get close enough to procreate, or where are the children in these stories? And of course, they're there. So we turned to a set of documents that we hoped would give us a window into, in this case, St. Augustine, from the 16th through to the early 19th century. And we collaborated with the wonderful Dr. Jane Landers from Vanderbilt University. A couple of my graduate students said, oh, we really want to get involved in this. And I said, are you sure? Well, now they don't speak to me. They're so mad at how much time was taken. I often get messages saying, you owe me my 20s. I want them back from the work. These 2 students traveled to St. Augustine every weekend from St. Petersburg. And they digitized the entire parish archive from St. Augustine, Florida. Records that date back to 1594. Here they are posing, one of the action shots for this, and they digitized 8,258 pages of parish records from the St. Augustine archives. And Vanderbilt University, through Jane Landers, very graciously agreed to house that material on a database that she had built called the Slave Society's Digital Archive. And there it sat. We finished this project back in 2013. Slowly, we started to get messages from teachers and from students and others saying, oh, it's wonderful that you digitized the material. But what does it say? What do these documents record? And just to give you an idea, this is what some users would see. This is the state of some of these records. So how do you read that? What does a 5th grade Florida history student do with this? What does a teacher of Florida history do with this? Or a genealogist, for that matter, without special training in Spanish paleography? So in 2019, we applied to the National Archives for a major grant to, in a sense, make these records accessible. And we received some very generous support as well from the Huff Family Foundation and the Duckwall Foundation and the Lastinger Foundation in Northeast Florida to build this site called La Florida, the Interactive Digital Archive of the Americas. And I wanted to start really with the oldest marriage record in that collection. And it's a marriage that records the union between a guy by the name of Gabriel Hernandez and a woman by the name of Catalina de Valdez. And they married in St. Augustine in early February of 1594. Now, this is a document that's been known to a lot of early Florida scholars. It's not like we had uncovered this record. People knew about it and have known about it for a long time. In fact, this is the great Florida historian Michael Gannon presenting a facsimile copy of that exact marriage record to President Kennedy. And this was just a few days before President Kennedy was assassinated. And Michael Gannon was saying, look, you think Jamestown, etc. This is the marriage record from 1594 between these two. Now, of course, it's not the oldest Catholic Christian marriage in what becomes the continental United States. That, as far as we know, is this record. This is a reference to a marriage that took place in St. Augustine in the fall of 1565. So 65. Between a guy by the name of Miguel Rodriguez, here, who's a native of Segovia, Spain, and a woman by the name of Luisa de Abrego, native of Seville. Those two got married in St. Augustine in 1565. Well, what we know about Luisa de Abrego is that she was a free black woman. So the oldest surviving Christian marriage we have for the United States is an interracial marriage between a Spaniard from Segovia and this free black woman from Seville, Spain. Yeah. So the archive itself, just to give you, I now know, having spent since the 16th century working on this, has 8,258 pages divided into books and boxes. Most of the records are baptism records, about 5,500 pages, confirmation records, only 150 pages, but it's a little deceptive because the scribes who recorded the confirmation records decided, I guess collectively, that our goal ultimately is to make future scholars blind. So we're going to write it in the smallest possible hand. So 150 pages actually equals, I don't know, 800,000 pages of data, putting those in. Marriage records, about 1,600 pages, and then deaths and burials, we have 1,450 pages of those records. And this was the project. Lost Voices from America's Oldest Parish Archive. And we had to do, in order to get this finished, we had to do a bunch of things all at the same time. So the first order of business really was to transcribe, was to take the documents and transcribe every word that appears on those records. And as I showed you before, they look a little bit like this. We were very fortunate to hire a woman, I think from my perspective, is one of, if not the finest 16th century Spanish paleographers anywhere. She's based in Seville, Spain, and she agreed to work with us on this particular project to help us transcribe these documents. And every Friday she would send me a report. And every Friday I'd look forward to what does Esther have to say about this week's transcriptions. And most weeks I would get terms like this. Thank you very much for letting me participate, reading these infernal documents. My favorite still to date is, things have taken an ugly turn, paleographically speaking. Paleography is the study of handwriting. So Spanish paleography, you probably noticed that if you were listening to NPR on the way over, that Governor DeSantis had announced this morning that all Florida students had to study Spanish paleography before they could graduate. It's a recurring dream that I have, that I hear that announcement, and no, it's still not true to this date, although it's our goal to make sure everybody learns how to read this stuff. And then a team of about 7 of us worked on all of the data. And we constructed over the course of about 18 months a spreadsheet that runs from here, I don't know, 6 or 7 miles that way, with hundreds and hundreds of thousands of data points about every piece of information that we could record from these particular parish records. And so if you mention Excel and I sort of scream, it's because that's what I did for 3 years, is plug in data into Excel spreadsheets. And what did that data start to show? Well, one, there's this notion, Spanish St. Augustine and Spanish Florida. When you look at the breakdown of the people who lived in St. Augustine in these records, this is just a sample of where people came from. And we have people of African descent from as far north as New York and Philadelphia, lots of runaway enslaved peoples from the Carolinas and Georgia who appear in these records. Kentucky even appears in these records. All over Europe. One of our favorites is this, and I say this in all sincerity, there is a very nice dinner awaiting the person who can tell me where this place is. There's an individual in the records who is allegedly from Wales. He's sometimes called the English guy. He's from Wales, and you can imagine a Spanish scribe who's asking him, "Where in Wales are you from?" And he said, "Well, I'm from here." Where is this place? It is one of the many challenges in terms of the translations. What do you do with terms like this? This XPT at the end has a line above it. The name of the place probably ends in Christ or Cristo or Christ or something like that. I still don't know what place it is. So anyway, we're waiting to see if somebody can tell us where this individual was from. Native Americans identified, certainly Timucua and Apalachee and Wale and Ais and Yamasi, Potano. I have Nawa and Maya with question marks because there were certainly people that we would call today Maya, who'd been brought from the Yucatan Peninsula to St. Augustine in the colonial era. And then the Nahuas, there were a pretty sizable group of individuals, Native Americans from central Mexico, people we would call Aztecs today, living in St. Augustine in these records. People of African descent, just an idea of the various ethnonyms that appear in these records. There are 37 unique African ethnonyms that the records document. Now, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail with those. They can be quite difficult in thinking about, were those people identified as Angola really from Angola, or were they shipped from Angola? Congo, again, can mean lots of different places. And so, but just there, we're getting a window into the free and enslaved population. Now, that's only from 1594. We know that, for example, the first people of African descent identified in Spanish expeditions to Florida go back to 1513. And there were at least 2 free black men who joined the Ponce de Leon 1513 expedition. This individual, Luis, this comes from a muster roll in St. Augustine from 1566. Luis is identified as a mulatto and a translator from the land of Carlos, Colusa. It's the only reference I've ever seen to Luis, likely a shipwreck survivor who had been taken and lived among the Colusa, and Menendez ransomed for his release in 1566. This guy, Juanillo, or Little John, Young John, Negro, who was under the, who was a captive, basically, of the Timucua chief Saturiba in northeast Florida. and he too appears in this muster roll from 1566. That's our campus. Yeah, well, 1619, they're only off by 106 years, so it's close. But again, there's this entire history of the presence of people of African descent that dates back to at least 1513. That I think it's important to get this integrated back into a broader national narrative about the presence and the experiences of people of African descent in what becomes the United States. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the site because it's more fun if you play with the site and get on the site and you can explore these records. But just to give you an idea of what you can do, there are all kinds of filters that you can use: occupation, sex, place of origin. And what we've done is we've broken down all of these sacraments into smaller pieces. So if you want to look at all the baptism records, you can click here. If you want to scroll the entire collection, you can look here. You can move this date bar so you can change the range of dates. If you're only interested in finding documents from 1640 to 1643, you can use that date range and it will only show you those documents. If you were to look at baptisms, this is what would appear. And this indicates that these are the baptisms found in bound books in the archives. And these boxes were all loose leaf pages that had been shrink wrapped, basically, to preserve them. But they appeared in loose leaf boxes. And so here they are. Here, box 1, obviously the oldest of the documents. And these all contain baptism records in them. And so if you were to click just on box 1, and this applies to all of these. This is kind of what it looks like when you get into the site. So you'll see the document here. You'll see that it's baptisms with the image number. All of the names that appear in this particular box are the names of people who appear on this page. So all of these individuals appear on this page here. So you could click, if you wanted to click on one of these white crosses here, this blue circle with a white cross in the middle. That would give you a very brief profile. Oh, here's Gracia, no last name recorded. Wow, she appears twice, so there's at least one other document about her in these records, and that's all we have for her who appears on this record. But if you click on the document itself, you get to the viewer. And this is what the viewer for all these documents looks like. You can enhance the size, you can play with the contrast and do all sorts of things if you want to see it a little bit more closely. This is the record with Gracia, and here she is here. And Gracia, this record here, somebody before they were shrink wrapped, it must have been a man, wrote the year 1595 in purple crayon. And you just cringe. Every time I see it, I just want to cry, but it's there. In any case, this record here is a baptism record of Gracia's son, a guy by the name of Esteban. This is the first documented enslaved person we have in these records, and that's 1595 in these particular parish records. And this is her. This is Gracia, no last name recorded. And so if you clicked on her full profile would look like this. And what we tried to do with these spreadsheets was anytime somebody had an attribute, we would record different attributes, but we only recorded certain attributes if they were in the documents. We did not assign racial categories to people. Even if we knew that somebody's mother happened to be a Native American, father happened to be European, we did not call the child a mestizo or a mestiza unless the documents identified them that way. And one of the really striking elements of working with these parish records is rarely are racial descriptors used. And there are a lot of people who are of Native American descent who appear in these records, and they're not identified that way. And so You'll see, here in this race, she's identified as a negra. She has various other attributes that change over time, and that's what we wanted to create, a system that was malleable, this database that allowed different kinds of attributes over the period of somebody's life to be recorded, because they're not static. And the way people sometimes self-identify in terms of racial terms are different. And we have people who appear 6 or 7 different ways described in these parish records. And so we wanted to make sure we kept all of that and maintained the integrity of what the records actually showed. And then for fun, and by fun I mean everybody on the team hated me for this, we decided, why not draw polygons around all of the words, so that when somebody scrolls over the word on the document, just with your mouse, the word pops up. That was not part of the grant. That was just something we said, oh, let's just do this for fun because, hey, nothing else to do. COVID, everybody's locked inside. And so we did that for about 1,000, 1,100, 1,200 pages of these records, and then decided, that's it. We're not doing any more of these particular polygons. You can do a search in the main, on the main page, this kind of main search bar for any term that you might think might appear in any of the parish records. So just for fun, I typed in the word twin. What happens when you type in the word twin? You'll see that there are 41 different records, just with that search for twin. Now, if you did this without the database, this would take years to go through all 8,200 and to find evidence of twins. And now you can do it in 5 seconds doing a search. And then I thought, what happens if you type in the term drowned? And you see that there are 25 death records, it appears. There are other ways you can type in drowning, and there might be another reference to individuals who drowned in St. Augustine. So all of this then is connected to a section that we call people. And this is a section in which we're building it's really an organic part of the site where we're building a platform that houses biographic information about every single person we find in the documents who lived in Florida at any point between 1513 and 1821. And at present, we have this people section. At present, we have 75,570 people in the database. Some of them are overlaps, but 75,000, and so you can do a search by names, find individuals by looking for names, any filter that you want to use to find them. So if I just were to type in Bartolome Solana, you would see that there are a number of instances, 17 matches for the name Bartolome Solana. And if you wanted to look at one, say, oh, that's the right person, you can go to that person's profile again. You can see the record for his baptism here, seeing that it's a baptism record. You can look in more depth on the sacrament itself and see when his date of birth was, the date of baptism, mother, father, the officiant, the signing official, and the names of the godparents. So all of this other information recorded related to these sacraments. And then if you just clicked on the document itself over in sources, it would take you back. So everything's connected, so you don't have to be backspace, and trying to find things. It's all very much connected. And this is one of the examples of one of the about 900 pages of documents written in Latin. So we have the Latin transcription. We translated the Latin to Spanish and to English. So the site is, in terms of the documents, it's fully bilingual and includes Latin if you want to brush up on your Latin and read the originals. I will say, though, that Esther, the woman from Spain, wrote to me and said, what kinds of priests did they have in St. Augustine? And I said, why? She said, their Latin is incomprehensible. their Latin is terrible. And in many instances, you have officials coming from Cuba saying, stop recording these entries in Latin. First of all, you don't know Latin very well, and I want you to record them in Spanish. Okay, yeah, we'll do that. And one of the great joys of working on this is you realize that, again, unlike today, when people are given instructions, they followed them. No, they didn't follow them at all. The person would leave, and then they'd go back to recording them however they saw fit to record them. So we know from his record, for example, that he was baptized in 1785. All of the profiles have a section called Affiliated People, and you can go to their profiles by clicking on to any of the people who appear in that particular baptism record. So if you wanted to know a little bit more about his mother, you can go straight to her profile. And you see she has more attributes, so different places of residence. We see that she was initially from Menorca, but there'll be other places where people lived, and we wanted to record those different places. And then, of course, Bartolome Solana appears a year later. Any idea why? He died. So certainly one of the things you see in the death records is infant mortality was very high. And so we have Bartolome Solana's baptism record, and then a year later we have his death record. And so that whole site, all of those are connected, and so the goal is to build this repository that really shows the diversity and the richness of this region we call Florida. We did add another site just again for fun called Be the Scribe. We took original documents related to Florida and we designed 7 different fonts. So we took the letters and we built full fonts using those. And here are the 7 different fonts that you can select on the Be the Scribe section. Look, I'll confess, it is part of a sinister plot to make sure everybody learns how to decipher these early texts. And I know it works when I get hate mail from teachers saying, students are writing notes in these strange coded letters. And I say, okay, good, Be the Scribe is working. And so if you can send email messages or you can purchase fonts that go to building more for the site. And so if you wanted to write, many thanks to the Tampa Bay History Center and Weedon Island Preserve, and you wanted to use this particular font, this is a memoir written by a priest who joined the Menendez expedition in 1565, and he wrote an account of that expedition. And this is part of that original account, so we decided to create a Father Lopez font, and that's what it looks like in his handwriting. Then if you prefer 17th century, you can choose a font. This is 18th. This is the House of Bourbon font. And then the 18th century, the Presidio font, the 17th century looks like this. So you can see kind of the range of the different hands that you see. And then I'd like to conclude the presentation by going back to Gabriel Hernandez and Catalina de Valdez. Because this is the oldest marriage record in the collection. It is the record that Michael Gannon gave to President Kennedy. And when you look at the parish records, Catalina de Valdez appears multiple times in the records. And we can start to build a bit of a picture of Catalina de Valdez's life. Well, we know, for example, that she and Gabriel Hernandez baptized 6 children. Juan and Maria. Any idea what's going on there? Yeah. So this Juan likely dies, and then so they baptize another child named Juan. Gabriel, named after the father, we think. The father's name is not recorded in this, and we suspect that by this date, Gabriel had passed away. Because not long thereafter, Catalina de Valdez remarried a guy by the name of James from Spain, Jaime de España, and baptized 2 more children. Not terribly uncommon that we see women in these records who baptize 7, 8, 9. Elite women in particular had, it seems, more children. So who was she? Who's this Catalina de Valdez who appears in these records? Well, I'll go back to that first enslaved African woman, Gratia, and it says here, she's a slave of, and then the page is torn. And there are so many of these pages. The slave of, and then, ripped off the page, not there. Except the last part of the name, Talina. And there's only one name in Spanish that ends in Talina, and that's Catalina. And so here, Catalina, that's all we know about her. And then my colleague, Rachel Sanderson, was going through the death records, and she found Gracia again. And she's the slave of Catalina de Valdez. This is her death record from 1637. So we have the baptism record from 1595. All we know about Gracia right now is she spent the better part of her life, more than 4 decades, as the enslaved woman of Catalina de Valdez in St. Augustine. Doesn't tell us much more about her. She had a lot of children. She had at least one enslaved individual. And in some respects, I think it demonstrates the limitations of these kinds of records, of sacramental registers. They don't give us often the sort of details that we want about individual lives. And so you have to look elsewhere. And fortunately, we have other documents about Catalina de Valdez. Twice, she submitted proof of merit petitions in the early 17th century, asking for recognition, reward, money, basically, from the crown. And what do we learn about her in these records? Well, we know that her father was a guy by the name of Juan de Valdez. Her mother was an elite indigenous woman from Escamacu, present-day South Carolina. That's her mother. Her aunt, Maria Melendez, India Principal de Escamacu, also from South Carolina. Both of these women were likely brought to St. Augustine in the early 1580s when there was a conflict between the governor in St. Augustine and the Escamacu. They were likely brought as hostages. They lived in the governor's residence. Catalina had a child with Juan de Valdez. It doesn't appear they were ever married. They had a child, and that was Catalina de Valdez. None of the parish records identify her by race. She is never called an India. She is never called a mestiza. She is Catalina de Valdez. That's it. If it weren't for this document, we would never have known that she was of indigenous ancestry and that her mother and her aunt were both elites from up near Paris Island, present-day Paris Island, South Carolina. What's really interesting is that her aunt, Maria Melendez, married quite an important individual in St. Augustine, Juan Jimenez de la Cueva, also in 1594. This is the earliest baptism record we have in the record. So the earliest marriage record is this woman of indigenous descent. The earliest baptism record is the child of Maria Melendez, who is an Escamacu Indian woman from present-day South Carolina. And guess who the godparents in Catalina de Valdez is for their first child? So you have this scene where Catalina de Valdez baptizing the child, and there's her aunt, Maria Melendez, this elite indigenous woman, Escamacu woman, presiding over the baptism. The other thing we learn about Catalina de Valdez is that she was, it seems, her mother was quite instrumental in 1586 when Francis Drake attacked St. Augustine. And Catalina de Valdez tells us that she was taken captive by the English. At this point, she could not have been more than 11 or 12 years of age. So it really, again, one of these many moments reading these kinds of records where you start to think, this is some really tragic stuff. You hate to consider what might have happened to Catalina de Valdez as a captive of the English who invaded. In any case, her mother, is able to move freely between the English encampment and the Spanish. And what Catalina de Valdez tells us in her proof of merit petition is that her mother was instrumental in providing intelligence to the Spanish about the movements of the English. She led one of the Spanish soldiers, a guy by the name of Juan Ramirez y Contreras, to ambush the English Sergeant Major Anthony Powell, and he killed Powell and his horse. And the petition ultimately says, this guy, Juan Ramirez y Contreras, was rewarded for his services. My mom was not. Time to pay. We don't know the actual outcome, whether she received anything from this, but that's what she asked for. And I wanted to really end on that story because it's one of thousands of different tales of individuals whose lives have not really been recorded in the historical accounts that look at this 16th and early 17th centuries of Florida history. And that's one of what I see as a multitude of what I hope will be stories that emerge as more and more people start to work with this material now that it's available and freely accessible to anybody with internet access. So on that note, I want to thank you again for coming today, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.